fact. There's this moment in a Hanabie concert where Yukina, the vocalist, stops in mid-song, a song she's singing in Japanese, and in English, completely unprompted, and screams out. She doesn't do this for shock value. It's not for the crowd. It's because the feeling is too big for one language to contain, and she didn't ask anyone's permission to say it. This is not a Gen Z moment. This is a Gen X moment. It's just wearing a Gen Z face. So let me be clear about what Gen X was, because the nostalgia version gets us wrong. At the time, we weren't cool. We weren't celebrated. We were overlooked. We were underfunded. We were ignored by every institution. Every institution was too busy managing the boomers that were ahead of us, and then eventually pivoting, manage the millennials coming behind us. What we had is we had independence. We were latchkey kids, but this independence was born from necessity. Nobody was looking, so we just did what we wanted. We built local music scenes in cities that had no infrastructure for music. We started companies in garages because we couldn't get or didn't want the jobs that were at the companies that existed. We figured out how to record music on 4-track cassette decks because we couldn't afford a real studio, and traded dubbed tapes. There was no algorithm to surface the type of music that we wanted. Now, there's a lot of nostalgia to those stories, but it wasn't romantic at the time. It was just what you did when you were living in a system that wasn't built for you and you wanted to do something anyway. It is a perfect conversation for this channel. The perfect case study for this is heavy metal. When Gen Z discovered metal, and I mean really discovered it, not through radio, not through MTV, but through our friend's older brother's cassette or LP vinyl collection, it was tribal. You see, Iron Maiden wasn't getting played on the radio, and Judas Priest wasn't what you were hearing when you were at the mall. You found it through this underground network of people who had already found it. And then you learned it and you passed it on. No permission, no infrastructure, no institutional support. That is the Gen X origin story, and it matters because it is happening again. I see it. All of a sudden, my eyes are open and I see it happening right in front of me. But what happened in between? The millennials arrived, and the system entirely pivoted to serve them. Not because there's anything wrong with millennials. They came of age at a moment in time when the institutions were paying attention. Economic development started paying, cities started paying a lot of attention to them. Those institutions, they started optimizing, and they optimized really quickly. Cities, all of a sudden, they built these walkability scores and the co-working spaces and weekend farmers markets, craft brewery on the ground floor of every mixed-use project. All the things that millennial focus groups told people, told the institutions that generation wanted. The universities, they created these entrepreneurship programs and these pitch competitions and mentors and safe spaces to fail. Record labels were paying attention to streaming and social media because that's where the millennials were. The whole machinery of capitalism pivoted, and it pointed itself at one generation and said, we will build this stuff for you. And millennials, for the most part, they engaged with that machinery. Why wouldn't you? They worked inside the systems. The systems were being built for them. They sought the validation from the institutions that were paying attention to them, built careers inside the structures. The problem is that cities and entrepreneurs and economic developers especially, they're all still operating that millennial playbook. The co-working space, that was a millennial amenity. The downtown activation strategy was a millennial strategy. The social media marketing team optimizing for LinkedIn posts for the millennial approach. And in the meantime, Gen Z's already moved on. As your city. Love Bites is that exception. Love Bites, they are millennials. Mia, Sami, Fami, Midori, Runa, they're all in the millennial range. But they built their career in music exactly the way that Gen X built things. They did not wait for the Japanese music industry to hand them a European sound. Mia studied the architects of British and German metal all the way from the ground up, and then went to Finland. They hired the engineers who built Nightwish and Stradivarius, and they built something that out-Europeans European metal. That's what they decided to do. They did it in an unapologetic way. That is the Gen X template. It's just being applied by a millennial band. No permission, no institutional intermediary, just the work and the will to do it. And so Love Bites are the exception that proves the rule, and that's why they're our 2025 Band of the Year. That's the reason, and which we announced last week. Thank you all for watching, and thank you all so much for the engagement that you showed on there, why they were our 2025 Band of the Year. So hopefully you'll be able to do that when we announce our 2026 band. But the generation that's doing this as a rule rather than an exception is Gen Z. Let's talk about Gen Z. Gen Z didn't inherit that millennial relationship with the institutions. They watched their parents, a lot being Gen Xers, they watched their parents navigate a system that kept changing the rules on them. And they came away with a different conclusion about the system and the institutions. It's not that you work harder inside that system. It's not that you find institution that's the right one to validate. It's that you build your own thing and you don't ask if you can do it. And there's some big differences here. If Gen X, if we were growing up in this time, what would we be like? And it's why we talk about is Gen Z. Gen Z is Gen X. 74% of Gen Z can get their information now from TikTok and ChatGPT. Not Google, not the news, not the channels that cities and companies have been optimizing for the last 15 years. The infrastructure that most organizations built to reach young people doesn't reach the young people anymore. But this isn't a technology problem. This is a generational mismatch, one that most cities are pretending that isn't happening. But it gets really important here because Gen Z, the way Gen Z operates is not laziness and it's not entitlement. It's about belonging. And heavy metal is a genre built completely around belonging for people who thought that they didn't belong. They didn't feel like they belonged, at least in the places where they were. Those institutions that historically provided belonging, that built the boomer generation, the company that paid you a pension, the church, the fraternal organizations, the VFWs, those are gone. Gen Z is searching for belonging in their absence. And metal fans, Gen X metal fans, and Gen Z, we are the same argument from different angles at different points in time. But both are looking for real places that see them and who they are. A coffee shop with laptops, that's belonging. The dive bar with the original metal band where the scene gets built, that is belonging. They're both the same infrastructure problem. And cities that can understand this, they're the ones that are building for the next 20 years when Gen Z replaces us as Gen X as the ones in charge. The ones making the spending decisions, making the investment decisions, making the decisions that impact everyone around them's lives. The cities who aren't building for this already are the ones that are going to look up in just 5 years and wonder where all the energy went. And so what we do on this channel is look at this through the lens of music, where I always look first. And music doesn't lie about who people are. And I see Gen Z doing exactly what we in Gen X do. They're finding music through algorithms and organic discovery, the same way that we found it through the underground cassette tape network. Not through what's being pushed, through what we find on our own. It's through what they find on their own. They're building bands and audiences before any label has ever heard of them. They're not waiting for the deal. They're building their tribe first and not asking permission ever. They're showing up to metal shows with a full conviction of someone who found this music and claimed it as their own, the same way that Gen X kids did when we showed up to those first shows decades ago, 40 years ago. I've been watching it happen in real time. On February 21st, I played the outdoor stage at the Brutality Metal Festival in Miami. 837 people showed up for that. What happened around before the show, I interviewed a bunch of the bands. I spent time with them before and after the sets over there. The things I kept seeing, especially in the younger bands, the ones who were just starting to build, was something that I recognized. They didn't come up through any system. There was no infrastructure waiting for them. Miami doesn't have a machine that produces metal bands. What Miami has is a handful of veterans who have kept the flame going through years when there was almost nothing. And then now we have this new wave of younger musicians who've found the music on their own and they've decided to build something that's theirs. One of the bands that we interviewed right here, Medic, Gen Z, kids. They came out, showed up to the pre-festival meeting, didn't need any introductions, didn't need any intermediaries. They walked out, they said, here's who we are. The way they carried themselves is not something that you teach. It's something you have or you don't have it, and they had it. And when Jason from Silent Mara was here, before that meeting, Jason's a veteran of the scene. He's been doing this for a long time. He's watched multiple cycles of the Miami metal scene build and collapse and rebuild. And keep coming back to something that he said as I think about the kids in Met. What you realize is the replacements are here. We don't mean that cynically. It's not about our time is over. It's about it's relief. The replacements are here. They can keep the scene going. The way that a Gen X musician who kept the scene alive for 20 years looks at the next generation picking it up and says, okay, the thing that we've been fighting for to keep going is going to survive me. What can we do to keep that foundation for them and help them succeed. And so that is the moment, and that is what Gen Z is doing in heavy metal right now. It's what Gen Z is doing in other industries and other sectors, and so many companies and so many cities trying to build these great places don't have any idea that it's happening. I want to make a distinction. Before we get back to Hanabie, there's a distinction that matters. On this channel, I would say there's 3 Japanese heavy metal bands that define what this channel is built around. They're all fearless, but they're fearless in completely different ways. Baby metal is fearless. They're fearless through perfection and precision. Every movement is calculated and planned. Every note is placed. It's fearless as mastery, confidence. Fearless innovation. They put 2 things together that shouldn't work, and it worked for a lot of people. They're very polarizing, and they don't care. They're fearless through the polarization and the negative comments that some have about them. They move on. Love Bites, they are fearless through elegance, through virtuosity. Their craft is the weapon. One of the best metal bands ever, with some of the best metal musicians to ever play in the genre. Their fearlessness is excellence. Cuts right through. Hanabie, you saw at the opening, they are fearless through not giving a damn. And I think this is something that resonates so much with Gen X. They're the one who gets censored. They're the one who YouTube blurs the middle finger out on the Spicy Queen video. Once you taste it, you'll never forget it. A pop lyric. It's a threat, and it's being delivered with a smile. Yukina says, "What a festival," because the feeling's too big for one language. She doesn't look at the crowd to see if it's okay to say it. She doesn't apologize after she says it. She moves on. That's the posture, and that is a posture that is pure Gen X. The generation that built things asking, said what we meant without checking for approval, and showed up and did the work and let the results speak. Hanabie is that posture arriving in Tokyo in 2024 with a Gen Z face. Now, there's a lineage here, and I want to name it directly. In 1975, a teenage girl picked up a guitar in Los Angeles, and she started playing rock music. And she started playing it in a way that nobody thought a girl should play rock and roll. Loud and raw and aggressive. No elegance and no apology. Joan Jett didn't get polished. She got harder, and she built an entire career on middle finger energy, refusing to be told what she was supposed to sound like. And it's a direct lineage. The Runaways and Bad Reputation, and then I Love Rock and Roll. 40 years of just showing up and saying exactly what she needed to say when anybody else thought about it. Be damned. Hanabie is that lineage, and it's arrived in Tokyo 40 years later. 4 young Japanese women. No apology, no compromise. They built a fan base in the United States before Japan's domestic infrastructure figured out who they were. Very similar to Love Bites, of building that global following through just sheer force of authenticity. And now they're coming back on their own. So this should sound familiar because it's the same story that every Gen X band built when they built their following through that underground before the mainstream caught up. And it's the same story that the Tampa death metal bands that we've talked about had Scandinavian acts flying in to Tampa to record at the same studio because that's where the expertise was. Gen Z found the metal and they're making the metal, and now they're exporting the metal to the world from Tokyo, the same way that places before us, England, Tampa, Scandinavia, have done it in the past. The way they're doing it, directly, tribally, not needing an institutional intermediary, it's exactly the way Gen X built everything that's worth keeping. And that's why we're not going to wait to the end of 2026. This channel is moving very quickly, and it's evolving very quickly, and it's finding itself very quickly. And it's because of some of the bands that we talked about, ones from the past and ones that are current. But the argument is already complete. We're already going to name Hanabie as our Music City's 2026 Band of the Year. See, Gen Z found metal, and Gen Z is making metal, and they are exporting metal to the world now from Tokyo. And the way that they're making it, directly and tribally, not needing an institutional intermediary, is the same way that Gen X built anything that was worth keeping. And so we're not going to wait until the end of 2026. This channel is evolving very quickly, and it's finding itself very quickly. And so since the argument is already complete, we're already going to name Hanabie as the Music City's 2026 Band of the Year. So with that, what I want to leave you with is every generation thinks that the next one coming along is lost, that they're lazy. Every generation looks at what's coming behind it. They see something unfamiliar, and they decide that unfamiliar means broken. Gen X looked lost to the boomers. We were slackers. We were cynics. We had no direction. That's what they called us. But we built the internet economy, and we built the indie music economy. We built the creator economy before anyone had a name for it. We built it without asking because nobody was watching. And there was nothing to wait for. Gen Z is not lost and Gen Z is not lazy. They are building. They're just building in a way that's unfamiliar to the other generations. They're building it differently because the tools are different and the world is different. In Gen X, as a metalhead, we went through vinyl, 8-tracks, cassettes, CDs, Napster, MP3s, streaming. These Gen Z guys and girls, they're growing up where what they know is streaming. Now they're falling back, and all of a sudden you see vinyl resurging, and you see these bands, the Gen Z bands, coming out with vinyl of their new albums. But it's very different tools that they're working with. But the independence is the same as the Gen X independence. The refusal to wait for permission is the same. The tribal loyalty to the music and to each other, to the things they found without anyone pointing it out to them, it's the same as it was for us. You see, the cup always refills. And as long as there's a small group that's going to keep the flame going, the veteran musicians who show up every decade and take the stage next to the kids who are just coming up, the ones who say we're not going to let what we went through die and go to waste. The scene isn't going to die. Metal's not going to die. The culture isn't going to die. See, as long as there's a small group keeping the flame going, the veteran musicians who show up throughout the decades and then take the stage next to the kids who are just now coming up, who say, we're not going to let what we went through go to waste, the scene doesn't die. Metal doesn't die. The culture doesn't die. Cities who understand this are the cities who are building for the next 20 years, 30 years. We do a lot of planning in this work, and we like to talk about 30-year plans, but we don't build for 30-year plans. We build for election cycles. The cities that are running their Gen Z engagement strategy through that millennial framework, who are still optimizing for Google SEO while Gen Z ignores you on TikTok and ChatGPT, are going to be lost in 5 years. See, the energy, it didn't go anywhere. It's right here. It's in the crowd. It's in the kids. It's in the bands. It's for the kids who walk up and say, we're here. They're not waiting for anybody to introduce them, because Gen Z is Gen X. And if you can figure that out, you can win. This is the Music Cities. This is where heavy metal is economic development. Let's do it. See ya.